Welcome everyone to our panel for Friday. This is, sorry about that. So welcome to our panel. This is topic is selecting sessions for Convergence. It's insights from the selection committee. And tonight we're going to talk with 5 of our volunteers who served on this panel. And I'm happy to have them all here. It's going to take a minute to get them all on. There we go. So we've got with us Dawn Alert, Nancy Crowley, Jess McDonald, Marilyn, Wayman Kaig, and Paula McFarling. And they all served on the panel this year to select our Convergence Sessions for 2024. And we're going to just talk a little bit with you about that process, what it's like to be a volunteer, what it's like to what we looked for in submissions. And if you have any questions, feel free, please put them in the Q&A and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. But to start things off, I just want to ask each of you, when you decided to apply to be on this selection committee, and then afterwards, was it what you expected, or did it meet, or how did it compare to what you expected? Let me ask you that.
I think it exceeded my expectations. I volunteered because I wasn't happy with the selection of classes at the last Convergence. And I've always thought that if you don't like the way something's being done, that you should try to do something to make it different. And that's why I volunteered. And I think that that would be a reason why a lot of people would volunteer to do it. But it was a really pleasant experience. It was a little time consuming, a little more time consuming than I expected. But I expect that will be streamlined in the future because you're learning as you go with this new application you're using to do it. But that was just my experience. It was pleasant.
I also thought it was a lot more work than I anticipated, but I loved it. It was so interesting to read all the proposals and see all the options that were being presented. It was just really, it was a lot of work, but it was so well worth it. And it gave me a big insight into all the work that goes on to put together Convergence, because we just helped to pick out some of the proposals, but then Elizabeth has to find the room, has to schedule them so that they're all spaced out by topic and by amount of time. And oh, my head was just spinning that last go round as we tried to figure out what proposals were good and the time frame they were in. And I love doing it, but it was pretty time consuming.
Yeah, I thought it was very enlightening to get a clue of what kind of work really goes into Convergence. Oh my gosh, like you said, Paula, it was just one little itty bitty bit, and it was a lot of work, more than I expected. In some ways, it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be because you guys gave us a good criteria and how to, judge and whatever. So it really was interesting that we could break it down and make it more objective than subjective, which really helped. And then for me, I did it because I hoped to one day be a leader. So it really gave me a lot of insight into what is required, what is expected, and how to present it.
Maybe I'll pop in next. I actually have a different reason for applying. Convergence has been something that has been part of my life for, I guess, the past decade. And the first time I went was in Milwaukee, and that was a wonderful experience. And I got really interested. And then I got to be an intern in Nevada. And then I actually was a leader last go around in Tennessee. And so my reasoning for applying was to see a different component of HGA and kind of how this work, like how it works, and to kind of have a little bit of more insight on how I was even chosen as a leader, excuse me, when I taught. So, and I guess I personally wasn't ready to put another proposal in, but I really wanted to be involved. So I wanted to make sure I kind of kept doing that. So, but it's interesting because, as we've all mentioned, it was a little bit more work, I think, than we all expected. But at the same time, you know, as both Paula and Don said, like, that's just one component of this huge organization. And what an honor that we got to have a little blip of that and to have a little insight to that. And the fact that we got to really put our voices forward and be heard and you know, with great criteria as well. So yeah, it was a good experience, really eye-opening.
Well, I don't have much to add, except it was a lot more work than I thought it was gonna be, but in the end, it was worth it. I just did it just to help HEA out, just because I feel like volunteering for an organization you believe in is a good thing. And I learned a lot. That I liked, because I learned the types of proposals they get, the subjects, all the different topics that they cover, all the variety of instructors and their approaches is very interesting to see, actually, for me. So it was well worth it. I'm the president of Intermountain Weavers, so seeing that what HGA is looking at really helped me. It's going to help me in our, you know, our next regional conference to figure out, well, what is available out there, what kind of people are out there, and what could we look for. So that was really, really cool to see. And I also appreciated Elizabeth's responses to our problems. There were some issues, but the HGA response was fast and efficient. So thank you for that.
And I do want to share for our audience, this was a new system that we brought on for the application process. And we had one person who had served on the selection committee for 2018, and she said that this system was much easier as a reviewer to review the proposals than it was how we used to do it. So how it used to be shared is we would do we had PDFs of every proposal that we would then share with the committee, and they would have to review all those PDFs, and then we'd have conference calls where we'd have conversations, and every year it's been slightly different. So this new system, it was first year using it. We've found some bugs and ways to fix that. So I trust it'll be better for the 2026 conference. And then the feedback that all of you gave as being guinea pigs for using this new system has also helped us come up with ways to reorganize that to make it a little bit easier, especially that third round. So for those of you that are watching, the first round we have all of this in the guidelines for those who are submitting a proposal, but the first round was yes or no. Would you want to take this class? Would you want to see it at Convergence? If so, yes. If not, no. And then if they made it through that round, then they went to a round where they had to score it on different areas. And then if they made it to that round, then they had to actually rank proposals from 1 to however many we had. And it was very interesting because I've noticed that most of you wanted to move almost every proposal forward. I think in each round, we cut maybe 30 the first time, or 30 or 50. I think I had to change the percentage because you didn't seem to want to cut anybody. So let's talk about, what stood out for you in the proposals. Like, how was it to try to make that decision whether or not to move them forward?
Well, one thing that I found is I wish that the people who were putting their proposals in would make sure that the proposals were in the right category. Because we had, like people were submitting proposals that were obviously supposed to be in weaving or whatever it was, and it's in dyeing, or I mean, that's exaggeration, but there was a number of them like that. And that makes it hard to evaluate the proposals against their peers because they're not in the right place. So when you're submitting, just make sure it's in the right place. That would help.
Well, and just an overall way to submit a proposal too. It would be so nice if it said, the teacher will do this and the student will do this. Instead of starting the proposal with, I like blah, 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 or, I mean, it's irrelevant to what we want to know what you're going to teach.
Coming from a corporate education background, I believe in telling people what you're going to teach them. So I think that they should put bullet points of this is what you're going to learn in this class, instead of going on and on about how much they love something or how they came into it. That's something that you talk about in the class itself. And you might give one sentence about it, but you're not going to devote a whole paragraph of your proposal to why you want to do it, or why you started doing it. Tell people what you want to teach them, because that's what's going to get them to sign up for it, and they'll come away with a realistic expectation from the class.
One thing
think
in
also-
general, oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Don, you go ahead. I'll go after.
Oh, it was just one thing in general is to fill out as many of the sections that you can, because some people left off websites or wasn't really appropriate, so we could look at your work, or letters of recommendation, just expecting, the committee to know your past, which may or may not have been, which there was some of that going on where people had so much experience that they didn't even bother with it, and then vice versa. So yeah, so just give us as much information as you have in the different
I think-
categories requested.
I think in the first round, what Elizabeth was saying, we were kind of maybe not as cutthroat as we should have been. But I think everyone's points are valid. And to add to that, what caught my eye as a visual artist is the photographs as an additional component to the written parts, because especially where people are coming from different parts of the world to join this, the written component absolutely is important, but like having good photographs to really highlight the skill, to show a potential end product or what you are kind of going towards. I found there were some proposals that left me a little bit perplexed. I didn't really know what it was for, because like Dawn had mentioned, not every part would be filled in, or as other people mentioned, you kind of be going on about how you maybe like horses, or nothing relatable to the, and so those would kind of get a no for me. If I'm not understanding, I it's hard to go forward. So and I think another thing too is when we're looking at so many applications, which is great. I think they mentioned this was one of the most, I believe, got applications in this time for the proposals. But in order to give each person enough time, like for us to look at each application, having things clear and concise and to the point is really great. Plus those visuals, plus fill in the stuff, and maybe not assuming that we know everything about you and what you've done, because unfortunately we don't have those powers. So, but yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for.
You made a point about the people's recommendations, and I would say that one of the things that they really have to do, especially if they're not already at least a regionally known speaker or teacher, is to make sure that you follow up with the people that you are expecting to recommend you, and make sure that they actually do that, because so many of them didn't have any responses from their recommenders, and I found that pretty disappointing, because I wanted to see what that other person had to say about them. On the other hand, if you're going to write a letter of recommendation, you're not going to say, stay away from this person at all costs. you're going to say something positive. But a lot of times the recommendations brought out something that we didn't already know about that person.
And that's a good point in the letter of recommendations, is that make sure that that your letter of recommendation ideally is about you teaching that session or something similar, because otherwise, if you're a great person, that's wonderful, but that doesn't really tell us anything. And I will add, if you are submitting, we had some issues with the letter of recommendations this year, again, new system, and I've been told by them that it's improved. They've made some improvements, but get your letters of recommendation in as early as possible, because they are due by the deadline as well. And that is not something you want to procrastinate on. Because if we don't get it, then we don't have it. And I do want to, for those of you watching, we received, I think, about 400 proposals. We typically have had in the past anywhere from 300 to 500 proposals for Convergence. And for this Convergence, we narrowed it down from about 400 to 150 sessions. So the instructions that the committee was given is that if it's categorized wrong, if it is, if there's an error in it, that if you think it's a 3-day workshop, but you think it should be a 1-day workshop, we're not going back to the proposer and saying, hey, can you change this? Because there's just too many proposals to go back and say, hey, can you make this change? So it was very important that information be correct. So let's talk about those images again. How important was the images for you and making it, and what recommendations would you have to somebody for submitting images?
They were very important for me. And one thing is that they needed to show, if it was a hands-on class, they needed to show what the student would make, not what you personally make and sell. It's what the class is teaching. And also the image needs to be like, if they're going to make a basket, show us the basket, not the basket full of candy on a table with gewgaws, or, just show us the individual thing, make it very clear.
I agree. I think the images were critical. Sometimes I wasn't really sure what they were after, and the images helped. The other thing is sometimes the images weren't of good quality, and that's not good either. They need to be done well. You see the colors, you see the patterns, maybe even see it from different angles help me. So they're critical.
I have a question specifically for Jessica and Don. Being that you have now served on the committee, how would this affect you the next time you decide to propose to teach at Convergence?
Yeah, I thought a lot about that. I definitely, it's interesting. I'm like, I hope I did my first application well. Obviously I did. I made it as a leader, but I also learned a bit more about more so ways to be a little bit more concise, perhaps, and to really, I just appreciate it a lot more, I guess, the process and the care that goes into it by the panel. So it just kind of reminded me, like, you were really lucky. So, you gotta keep your ducks in a row. So I think if I apply for 2026, definitely, you want to hit all those points. You want to be clear. You want to make sure there's no questions left to be answered, because as Elizabeth mentioned, there's no grace period to follow up and be like, hey, just want to clarify something. Because where I work right now, I have a team of 10 instructors, and even following up with them can sometimes be a cat and mouse game. So I totally understand the kind of like, if we can't figure it out, it's done. So I guess I just will be a little bit more on my toes when I apply.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I'm a very detail-oriented person, so I don't think that I would miss too much, but I would not maybe put the effort into every single little bullet. And now I know you need to put the effort into every single um, thing that you're expected to provide to explain yourself. Just be as in depth as possible and concise. Exactly. Yeah.
I know
If you're not a professional writer, and most of those people are not, I think it would really be valuable to ask someone else who is good at grammar and spelling to look at your proposal and make sure that you finished your sentences, that you used the correct words, and that you made it concise, because it's hard to do that when you're first writing it yourself.
you all had a lot of comments on grammar. I remember that.
Are we all members of the Grammar Patrol?
Was me.
One other thing.
Yes.
One other thing I thought about too was that it has to be doable within the amount of time. Like some workshops, they were going to spin and then they were going to weave it, or they were going to dye and then they were going to weave, or dye both cotton and wool in one day. I mean, some of those, it's like there's not enough time to get everything done. So then it just screamed, you don't have enough experience yet. It made me very wary of if they were capable of doing it. So that's another thing, having someone else read it to see if it's doable within the time that you're saying you would like for that class.
Not just within the time. I agree with you completely, Paula. It also has to be doable in the facility. You can't bring a flock of sheep to a convention center. There are just things that you cannot do. And so you have to make sure that people can haul it into wherever you want your things to be, and that there's enough room in the room to set it up and tear it down, because the rooms have to be used over again for other sessions. So you can't just take it over for a week.
So
That's
that
a
actually
good
leads
point.
into my next question.
Yeah.
And that is the supply list and equipment. And so for us, we define equipment as like your loom, your shuttle, your spinning wheel. It's the big stuff. And then supplies would be the things such as shuttles or yarn and things like that. And there was some sessions where you had a lot of discussions around the supply lists and the equipment requests that were provided. Let's talk. What would you like to say about that?
Remember that a lot of people are going to fly in for this. So not everyone's bringing a loaded station wagon or minivan.
And cost of supplies. They're either to provide your own, or if the instructor is going to provide it, to spend another $100 on paying the instructor for all your supplies. I mean, things add up, and not everybody has that kind of money, and already it's costing, so yeah, be sensitive to the amount of money and equipment needed.
And write something. Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Give them options if you can. I noticed some of them said you had to have XYZ color 2-5 of this, and it was expensive stuff. And you're wondering, well, why? And the teaching wasn't of that stuff, it was something else. So you're wondering, why are you requiring that? Why don't you give them some less expensive or easily obtainable options for the class? That would help.
I was really disappointed that some people didn't put anything down for supplies. Even in some classes where it was very clear that they needed to bring a pair of scissors, put that on the supply list. There are a lot of first timers who have no idea that they need to bring some basic weaving things or sewing items, or everything that you expect your student to have needs to be on that supply list. And I was so disappointed with some of the proposals that were really good, but when it came to supplies, I didn't know who was bringing the yarn? Is the teacher supplying it? Is the student bringing it? It wasn't clear. So that supply list, I felt, looked ignored by some in some proposals.
And if something's a little bit hard to find, include a resource. Or even arrange with your friend to put together kits that her shop sells. So you can point people towards a place to get what they need. And some people will want to do that. It will be so much easier to just get a kit from somewhere, even if the teacher is bringing the kit. But also to make sure that you don't have a lot of extraneous stuff on there that people won't need if they decide this technique is not for them. You have to have a nice balance, and it's worth putting some thought into.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what really everyone's saying, if there's nothing there, that's not realistic. Everyone's going to need something. And at the same time, as someone who's traveling international for these conferences, I mean, I save up money to go to these things because they're really, really important to me. And so accessibility is something that I think we should always be mindful of, especially in terms of cost and space and travel, and also to the material choice. I think that we're very privileged to come to these conferences and dive into these techniques, but perhaps it's, if you could have a secondary option for something, if you can't afford it, this might be this could be an alternative. Just think about every aspect. If you were teaching this class to someone, they don't know the technique, but if they know nothing, like, what is it you have to put down that you're going to need? Like, don't assume that everyone's going to know that they have to bring a certain kind of scissor or a certain kind of shuttle, because assumptions don't help at all. So putting in the information, thinking a little bit about balance between materials and time and cost and and being accessible, and also all of that to enjoy a good learning experience. Those are it's a little bit of a balance when it comes to teaching, and also wanting to explore new techniques and fibers. And if someone can do it and afford it, they will. Just things to keep in mind.
And just so everyone knows, the supply list, HGA does not review the supply list in the sense of where we're looking to say, hey, you're missing this. So when we publish the supply list for the sessions, that is what was provided to us from the leader, because we can't assume either that there's something missing or that it's excessive. So what you see is directly from the leader. Let's talk about fees, because that's something that there was also conversation about. Some leaders have a materials fee for supplies that they provide. And so what was your impression of that?
It was all over the place. It was from $5 to over $100. So, the same thing, like we were just saying, a little bit more realistic for the general Jane Doe.
Yeah, if you're only providing a 2-page handout, don't charge somebody $10 for it. That's excessive. And almost anybody can produce 20 copies of it for less than a couple of bucks. So be realistic about how much you're charging for that. If you're making a booklet, as some teachers do, that's one thing. But if you're just doing some photocopies, then that's another thing entirely. And be realistic about how much you're charging for it. And personally, I don't think you should be charging enough to cover your gasoline to go get a copy. Because that's just part of the overall teaching thing. Look at how many art teachers have to bring their own supplies for the kids to use in public schools. But think about how much it costs to get. You don't want people to have to spend enough money to set up their studio to do this technique forever, because mostly people were tasting it at this event. And so they want to come and they want to learn, they want to see what it's about. They don't necessarily want to set themselves up to do this as a business.
You also had some comments on people who you didn't think were charging enough for their materials fee. Anything to add to that?
I costed out some of the things, and I didn't see how they could possibly provide all the yarns and dyes and materials and things that they were supposedly that they were bringing for everybody, and they were charging them $5 for a materials fee, and they were bringing all kinds of stuff. And I just don't see how that is realistic, and why you would want to teach again after it ended up costing you money to teach instead of making money. Because we do have to remember that the people who propose these classes, a lot of them are amateur teachers or want to get into teaching weaving, but some of them teach weaving as a business. That is their business, is to teach weaving. And they might love it differently than they love another business that they might be in, but that's what they do for a living, and they need to be able to make money at it. So that's all.
One thing I wanted to bring up, I forgot about it, is some of the proposals wanted you charge a materials fee because they were providing yarn from the animals from their flock. Now, that's kind of pushing to me, the issue of whether you're advertising, your flock of sheep, or you're teaching a method. And so if you're just teaching a method using wool, I think you should be able to, and usually that wool is pretty high. So it just made me a little uncomfortable to kind of sell your stuff through teaching a class on using wool. That's what it appeared to me.
And just to follow up on that, that's a good point. In cases like that, I believe there could be an optional kit, an optional, but it doesn't, it was a weird, definitely a weird situation. Some of them to be like, but I think it's also it's obviously a balance between charging enough, not charging enough, but also to validate that you are an educator and a maker, and your time is valuable and worth it, especially if you're going to travel across the country to teach. And that's where prep time going into your proposal is so important. If you know your deadline, plan well in advance to be like, what do I need? What would it cost me to bring it? What would it cost participants if they brought it? You know what I mean? Like, kind of try to figure that out if you can. I've gone to a few workshops that have been wonderful, and there's been optional things to take home if I really like the technique, or if I want to explore fiber further. That's awesome. But yeah, I think what Nancy's saying is totally valid, and sometimes that's maybe not necessary, perhaps.
So we have a question. Pamela is asking, do you have guidelines for how many of each technique? For example, how many dye workshops? We gave you pretty loose guidelines, which was we want to have a dye class at a minimum, one every day. And that was for each of the topic areas. So how did that impact you, and what were your thoughts on that?
Well, it made, I was just noticing, I looked at my notes I took. There were 10 Kumahimo classes proposed. And that's a lot for braiding, and you want one every day. So then they're in competition with each other. So then as I was evaluating, I would look to see who used the coolest materials, or who had the best supply list, or who had that they're in competition with each other for who has the best proposal, who has the most interesting class to offer. And that's how it was with every one of the topics, the basketry classes, who has the most interesting baskets that can be done in the time frame that they proposed, that have the supplies that are at the best cost point for the workshop. There are all those little pieces that went into each topic that we looked at.
That was a big surprise to me too. Some of the topics that I thought there would be several teachers proposing, there wasn't competition, and then other ones that I wouldn't have thought. So there was no second guessing that either. So I guess when you submit your proposal, you know, you just don't never know what's going to happen that year, because that was a really eye-opening to
It
me.
was really important to me to see a very broad spectrum of techniques represented for each of our topics: spinning, weaving, dyeing, braiding. I think there was a little more jewelry making than I expected. I was kind of pleasantly surprised by it, because it's something just a little different. But I think it's really important for the teachers to think about, how long is it going to take a student to make this? Because every time, I mean, I know when you teach a class, every time you teach it, you get better at it and it goes faster. And the first time you teach it, it might take 3 hours, and the next time it might take 2.5 hours. So it gets exponentially more efficient. And so you have to think about how you as an expert, how long it takes you to make it, and how long is it going to take a beginner to make it, especially if you have 20 people in the class and you can't make it around to everyone. Also, we should encourage them to ask for interns, because an intern could really help them. I mean, sometimes all people need is to know where this goes, and an intern could answer that question a lot of the times. So
Jessica, you were an intern, so you know, knowing that and looking at these proposals and seeing some, I mean, there were many this time that did not say that they would take an intern. How did that make you feel?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I was quite disappointed and discouraged by that. You know, you had a really great talk, I think, back in Nevada, where you recognize that the future of our weaving is going to be passed on through our interns and our younger generation. And in order for this to keep going, you know, it's so important to have exposure and keep supporting the internship program. And as someone who has extremely benefited from that opportunity, I think we're really missing out on an opportunity for us as textile artists, makers, people who aren't in school, to be passing that learning opportunity. And it doesn't have to be like the classes I interned for, I didn't fully understand, because that's what the instructor's there for. I'm learning how to communicate with the participants, how I can help them, how I can help the instructor, what kind of things do you need? And just the exposure alone is so rewarding, and it is an eye-opener to how maybe a classroom or non-classroom, something more informal, perhaps a setting could be. So I think this was a really big letdown via proposals for people maybe, and I don't know what it is. I obviously didn't write the proposals. I don't know what the instructors were thinking, but just try to keep in mind that we're trying to keep a a beautiful craft alive that does have a little bit of an aging society in it. And we do want younger people to get engaged and encourage them because we want them to be leaders one day. And it's something I'm very passionate about, so I could talk forever on. But for next round, please think about the potential of what that would do for you, but think about what that would do for an intern.
And I just want to add, there has been especially since Reno, but I think we can go even back to Milwaukee, a good percentage of our interns have stayed involved with HGA and have been on Textiles and Tea. They've been leaders, they've been volunteers. And so it's really been a great way to not only keep them involved and to pass that knowledge, but also to keep them connected to the organization and everything that's being done. So when we hear from our members that we're a graying organization and we need to bring younger people in, having those interns is so important. So we do have a question on that from Wendy. She says, I'm curious how much time there is for an instructor to teach an intern how to help, and is there a chance to connect ahead of time? So I'm going to answer that a little bit for you, and Jessica, feel free to chime in as you'd like. But with the selections for the interns is done in the spring, and it's based on the number of students that are in the session. So we need to have, I believe, a minimum of 20 students. And then from there, we connect them so that on the proposal, you have the option to say, these are the skills that intern needs to have. And so when the intern applies, they have to share with us what kind of skills, they have to share references, and we connect them on that information. We connect them to the leader at least a month before the conference, so that if they want, and they have jumped on Zooms before, they've had conversations before they even get there, and then they have conversations during that. So Jess, do you have anything to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That actually reminded me of a few things. So when I did my internship in Nevada, in Reno, 100%, like I said, I wasn't sure what I was signed up for at the time, like when I first applied, but then a month before I was given the classes I was going to do, and one was on band weaving. I have never done band weaving, but I know weaving. I know weave structures. I know how to weave drafts. So skills are definitely interchangeable. And so I was able to connect with I think Joanne Hall and Rosalie Nielsen and a few people who reached out to me and said, hey, want to learn a bit about you and how we can, I can get you to help with the class. And sometimes they just wanted someone to be there as a support if there was a technical issue with a loom. Sometimes it would be to literally hand out resources and follow up with people while that instructor is doing something else. It really ranged, but definitely, I would propose saying I have weaving skills, I have basket making skills. I would say what those things are. They may not be exactly what you're teaching because I maybe don't know or haven't done it yet, but I have the knowledge and information to be able to be an assistant. And it's not just I show up and meet you that day of like, hey, we're doing a class now. There's a little bit of connection beforehand, so you don't just, the intern's not thrown into it, and so you also as an instructor are not completely thrown off to have to be like, okay, I now have to train this other person to, so it's not abrupt. And I didn't feel that as an intern. I felt really supported and going into it. So if that eases any questions or concerns.
One thing that it struck me about the intern program, which I had not previously come across because I haven't been to any of the convergences since you started doing that, is the connection between the teacher and the intern that can provide. They could end up being your mentor for many years. And I think that is just a wonderful thing. And that's a great way to help pass the skills along so that, we're passing the torch along. And it's a big shock to me to discover that I'm one of the oldest ones. And so now that I've tried to stop resenting all of you for having it so easy with all these wonderful dyed wools available to spin and all this yarn in many, many types and sizes and colors. And you can do anything you want to do without having to spin it yourself or dye it yourself. And so I just think that it's a great thing to encourage people to be interns and to encourage teachers to have interns, because it not only helps you, but it helps them.
So I want to try to wrap up the intern conversation, and then we'll circle back to a couple other things, but we do have a question that says, how much of the intern experience with a leader should be mentoring? And I think that really varies, and it's going to depend on how much the leader wants to mentor, and also what is the session going to require. Do any of you, Jessica, I know you probably have thoughts on that. Do any of you have thoughts on what you would expect from that? So it's how much of the intern experience with the leader should be mentoring?
If no one else wants to jump in, I think that's 100% a personal choice. If you feel like you have the time and want to devote some energy to maybe an additional mentoring, why not? You're only benefiting yourself, and you're benefiting the craft community and the weaving community if you have the ability to do so. And you have been given this great honor of maybe passing this down. And at the same time, there's balance with, you also have a job to do where you teach this class that you've proposed. And, I truly think it is a personal opinion, a personal choice. Some classes I went to intern, I literally just sat there and waited for someone to need help, and other ones were way more involved. So it really depends on the technique, I think, and maybe the class that's being proposed and how comfortable you are with delivering your own material. That would be my opinion.
Have any of you ever been in one of our sessions that had an intern?
Oh, yes, I've been in several.
What were your
They-
thoughts as a participant?
They were really helpful. It was nice to have someone else, if the instructor is busy, it's nice to have someone else to ask a question, because sometimes they're not really very technical questions. They might be logistical, or, it's nice to have another person who has a little bit of authority in the class to help you figure something out. I've found them very helpful.
So I want to circle back to the conversation we were having about how many dye classes, how many spinning, and so forth. This is a little bit along those lines. We have a question that's thinking about criteria, and they're saying, what about round robins versus stay at your own loom sessions? And we did have a bit of conversation about that. So
We did. I remember Elizabeth saying round robins, this is not really the place for round robins. They're not very popular. I think you also said that 1-day workshops are the most popular, and 3-hour workshops.
Yeah, I personally am not a fan of round robin, but I didn't mark anybody off for it. But I think it's doable on 3-day workshops if the instructor really, thinks it's important. And I actually had one class on color where the round robin thing ended up being very useful, because everybody played with their own color with different patterns on different looms. So it can be a useful technique. I personally didn't take that into account and said, round robin, no, I didn't do that.
And I like round robins, and I didn't find the opportunity to say yay or nay because of that. Given our criteria of what we were looking for, that wasn't really, part of it either. So,
Well,
I was at a round robin in Milwaukee, and one thing I really liked about it was that I got to try out so many different looms from people from all over the country. And that's how I decided to buy the table loom I got for the next workshop.
Well, conversely, who wants to be stuck using the table loom somebody dug out of the basement because they could lug that to Convergence, and they warped it up, and everybody's struggling to use it because it doesn't work properly. I've had that in several round robins, and I've been to many round robins, and I've taught round robins. And it makes it more difficult for the teacher. So it's important to make sure if you're in a round robin that your equipment works well. And personally, I just have a prejudice against table looms. So of course I just bought one. So
And I want to clarify, I didn't say that we don't do round robins, because we do them, but they have not been successful. So for a round robin to be successful, you need a minimum number of students to actually sign up. And so if you only get 5 people that register for that session, that's enough on our end for that session to actually go to take place. But from a student perspective, they're really not getting the full benefit when there's only 5 participants in the session. And I think that's the challenge. What are your thoughts on from a student perspective on round robins? Has it been successful? What makes it successful for you? And how could a teacher propose a session for a round robin for it to be successful?
I think each
I-
room has to have some value that's different than your own. In other words, like I was saying with that one color, everybody warped the looms with different structures. And then each person tried different colors of their own choosing on that structure. But if everybody in the class had the same structure, it wouldn't have been very interesting at all. But then again, there are certain ones, like I did a rep weave class, would have been a horrible round robin. It wouldn't make any sense. So it depends on the class. There's got to be something you learn from each loom that's different than your own.
But I did a round robin rep weave.
Yeah,
It
you
was
did.
great. It was great because
I-
each loom was warped with a different pattern on it.
Oh, okay.
And we learned different things at each loom.
I think it would be nice if the teacher could know ahead of time what looms are coming so that they could assign more difficult things to looms. Like there are some weaves where you need to use 6 treadles against 2 treadles. And so that's kind of hard to do on a table loom, but it's easier if somebody's bringing a baby wolf or a wolf pup. And so it would be faster for people. It would accommodate them doing it because they're trying to figure out how this weave structure works while they're weaving it. And so I think that would make it easier for the teacher to arrange it so that people could be more successful.
Yeah,
And also in round robins, you get backups. Everybody's waiting for loom 10 because it's difficult, and the loom's difficult to use. You're using stick shuttles instead of boat shuttles, and it escalates. It goes on from there. So I think they need to be really carefully thought out to
Yes,
make
I've
the
been
students
fortunate.
successful.
I've been fortunate where the round robins I've taken, the instructor has thought it out and has assigned what kind of loom are you bringing, and this is your structure, and they've all worked out well. So I guess I've been lucky to have good instructors that were thinking about that. So that's another thing. If you're going to propose a round robin, really maybe try it out on your guild or something like that before you bring it up to the next level, because there's a lot to think about.
We do connect our leaders with we provide them with a class list about 6 months before the conference. So they do get the contact information for every student that's in their class, and it's a dynamic list. So it constantly is updating based on who it is. So it would be possible for a leader to reach out to their students in advance and go share some of that material or go over that or get that information from them. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is that if they put in their proposal that they're going to reach out to the students and that they're going to get this information to make sure it's successful, would that sway your opinion on selecting that session?
I think so.
Okay. And Deanna Nielsen says, just an attendee perspective, if the technique you're teaching has several threadings to be worked through, a round robin is very successful. And she says she appreciates the comment regarding functional looms. And she'd say that 8 to 10 participants make that work. So again, on the conversation about criteria and diversity, we have several different options on the length of a class. We have 90 minutes, 3 hours, 1 day, 2-day, and 3-day workshops. And I gave you a little bit of guidance on the percentage that we've chosen in the past, but every year it varies. We have as many as 30 classrooms, and those classroom sizes vary. How was that for you in trying to make your decisions? What were your thoughts on the length and trying to decide? Do you want to add anything or share any perspective on that?
It was very difficult to get my head around how to figure out the percentages, because some of the things we were given guidelines on, but that I felt like I was floundering, so I had a very difficult time of trying to figure out which ones. And then when it came down to the ranking, okay, I got to also think about, so that was difficult on the panel to do.
I'm lucky in that I've been through this so many times because I've been spinning and weaving since 1978, and I'm familiar with a lot of these. So I was able to think around how long would I want to accomplish what she says, or what, excuse me, what they say they are going to be teaching in this session. How long is it going to take to really learn it? If they're going to have a long lecture, you're not going to have very long to actually experiment with it. So 90 minutes might not be good enough, but 3 hours would be a great taster for a technique. And that's kind of how I look at it when I'm selecting the sessions I want to attend. So how much do I want to know about this? And sometimes I just want to know a little bit more about it, and a 90-minute session would be great. And then I can, the next convergence or next conference I go to, I can take something that's more in depth. And but I think it takes experience to understand how long it takes to teach something. And that's why they should have taught it before they propose it to Convergence.
There's something else in that experience level too, is how long it takes for students to come into the classroom and set up their equipment, that they need to allow time for all of that also.
So
Well,
true.
We're getting close to the end here, so I do want to address one question from Marcy, and really, Nancy, I'm going to put this towards you. She says, I'm a little confused about your discussion of the submission about bringing fiber from the submitter's flock. Not all wool is the same, and some techniques are better taught with a breed or another. So the details of the wool matter. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what you had mentioned about that?
Yeah, I'm not saying that their wool is not good. It's just that when you're selling your wool and it has to be used, and in some cases, it made sense, like they had short workshops on how to use a specific type of wool. Okay. And there wasn't a big materials fee because it wasn't, using the wool. But I saw a couple in there that were trying to use wool from a flock that could be gotten from elsewhere. And also you're questioning, so if they're teaching shadow weave, do you have to have wool from their flock, was my point. I don't know if that's probably not the right example, but if there are other substitutes, I don't think you should be forcing people to buy expensive materials to learn a technique that doesn't necessarily need those expensive materials. And there were some that I was quite suspicious of, and I'm sorry, I was in the proposals.
I shared that suspicion, and it seemed like they were taking an opportunity to sell their wool. And maybe it's just that usually people who raise sheep and raise fiber animals just love their fiber, and they think that's the best, and that's what they want their students to use because they think they're going to be more successful with it. And so there are different points of view to look at that. But I think that if that's the way you feel about it, you should consider that not everybody wants to pay $9 an ounce for wool. And and just for a technique that they're learning. And if you're teaching this to sell your wool, then you should demonstrate at your vendor booth.
Just to add, you were advised that classes should not feel like the entire class is them trying to sell you something. And I do want to add, somebody asked, can we bring a flock of sheep to the convention center? And technically, yes, we could bring sheep to the convention center if we get the licensing and insurance for that in the convention center exhibit hall, but we couldn't bring them into the classrooms. I don't think they would allow that. So we've got to wrap this up, but a couple little things. I wanted to piggyback on Nancy. You had mentioned that this was helpful for you in thinking about Intermountain Weavers Conference. What would you take back from this experience and share with your guild or a regional conference when it comes to selecting somebody to do a program?
Well, one of the things that I realized is for years, we relied mostly on who was proposing to us like you did. And that's fine for Convergence because a lot of people, want to go to Convergence. But I think there are so many wonderful proposals submitted that we ought to reach out ourselves to some of these people that may not have considered our regional conference and really open ourselves up to a greater variety and more people. I think that would help the weaving and it would help us. And that was what I got.
I have heard that some people are not proposing to teach classes, or they're just not teaching anymore because they've been ill-treated by the people that they've taught for in the past. And that's a wide-ranging thing. It's not just in the weaving and spinning world. I've heard about that in the mixed media art world too. But so I think it's important that people I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. That's part of the problem of having been doing this for 45 years. I've become old.
I don't think that's the issue with us. I really don't. We try to treat our instructors like queens and kings. I think the main issue is that they just don't think about us, quite honestly. A lot of them just don't.
Or you don't know that the deadline is coming up. So yeah, it's really important to get the word out. And also we have to keep in mind that people come to Convergence expecting to see the top teachers of in the weaving and spinning and dyeing world and associated crafts. I don't want to leave anyone out, but I mean, you expect to see John Marshall there, you expect to see Robin Spady there, you expect to see Rosalie Nielsen, and because those are all internationally known names, and that's not even a very representative list. There are a lot of people who are really, really good, and people who have books out that publicizes their teaching and makes people who have their books want to come and take their class. And I think that that's important. That I think that HGA should reach out to people that they know about who've taught in the past to, hey, we've got this deadline coming up, and would you please like to consider teaching a class for us? And I think the regional conferences can do that too. And I think we would all benefit.
One thing I like that Elizabeth, in part of the criteria that we were looking for, was to look at new as well as well-established teachers, to look at the young and the new teachers too, because she wanted to have a balance and she wanted to make sure that we brought some of those new people into the fold. And so we did, and we looked at a lot of the proposals. Some of those proposals were pretty rough. And so we had to pick the best of their proposals. the ones that seem more fleshed out, that seem like they would be able to carry that out at a high level at Convergence. But I really respected that was an important thing for HGA to find, were the new people, to bring them in.
And I'm sorry if it sounded like I was.
Oh, no,
against
no,
the
no, it
new
was a good
teachers.
place.
No, because it's
Good
really
place.
important to
People do
bring
it.
the new people in, and I understand that. But it's also important to understand where the audience for these classes is coming from. And they come expecting to see the best and the brightest. And sometimes the best and the brightest is going to be 27 years old, and sometimes they're going to be 72 years old. So you just never know. But
The registration book is out. You've all seen it. You've seen the final selection as it all has come together based on the input that you provided. Are you excited about this 2024 class selection?
I am so excited to come to
Yes.
Convergence. Is everyone in this?
Yes, I'm very
Yes.
excited. Uh-huh.
Oh, yes.
It was fun to see some of the, there were a lot of unusual things that were in there, some variety and original. And so I was really curious to see if they would make the final cut with everybody. So I was happy to see some of those in there.
I felt the same way.
Yeah, I think
I
there's a
already-
really nice variety, really across the board.
As
I've
I
already
was
made my
reading
list.
proposals, I was thinking, do I want to take this class? Ooh, I want to take this class. I want to take this class now. And
Mhm.
then I ended up selecting classes that are maybe not the same list that I saw through past one, then past two, and finally past three. And yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was so worth it. And it was a really good group to work with. And working and getting to know some of the HGA staff was a big bonus.
They're
Oh, you-
such hard workers. Oh my.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to be on this, if they're thinking about being on the selection committee for 2026, what would you say?
Do it.
Do it.
Go for it.
Do it.
Go
Allow
for
a
it.
lot of time to do it, though.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Make sure you have a week free every month.
It wasn't
it's a-
that bad. I was working full time, but I had to budget my time to get it done and give it, the respect and the time that it warranted.
It's a lot of
And
reading.
do it.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming on here. I know we could probably talk for another hour about this and what all it entails. And of course, I'm sure if anybody has any additional questions, they can reach out to you through the attendee list and find you. But I appreciate everything that you and everybody else on the committee that's not able to be here tonight did to help us choose the selection for 2024. It was incredibly time consuming, and you were dealing with a short time period because we were in a time crunch with the new system and all the little bugs so thank you for your patience with that. And we are excited to see you in person in Wichita next year. And this is great, but it's going to be even better to be able to connect with you in person. So thank you for everything you did. And for those of you watching, thanks for stopping by to get a little bit of insight on the process. And we'll see you in Wichita in July.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Thanks to all of you guys.
Thanks, that was good. I wish I could be there, but anyway, have fun.
Where's